So welcome to the first of two sections of final project presentations for our Health Behavior Change Lab class projects. And today we'll have 4, and each group will present for 15 minutes, focusing on results they've gotten recently, kind of less on background stuff. And then we'll have 5 minutes for Q&A. And then afterwards, there'll be a little bit more time for people to hang out and have follow-on questions too if you want, but we'll try to get through all of them in the hour and a half. All right, so without further ado, let's start with Asma and Asaph.
Hi, everyone. I am Asma. And
Asaph, nice to meet you.
We are here to present our study on promoting kindness and gratitude using pervasive technologies. So, as you all know, the acts of kindness and the expressions of gratitude are fundamental to human interactions, and there is a large body of research showing their positive effects on several aspects, including interpersonal communications, organizational productivity, and probably most importantly, psychological well-being. So that's why we decided to explore new ways to promote both perceptions and also behaviors related to gratitude. So the first challenge that we encountered was how to measure gratitude. If you want to look at gratitude more thoroughly, we can see 4 facets in it, which has been verified by literature too. I just want to briefly explain them too, because these are the measures that we use to show our results to you later, so I just want to explain it before we reach to that point. So the first is intensity. It means how intense you feel grateful. The second is frequency, means how many times throughout the day people express gratitude. The other is the span, means to how many categories you feel grateful for, like, for example, families, friends, job, faith, and things like that. And the last one is density, means to how many people you feel grateful. So gratitude itself can be conceptualized both as a momentary affect and also as a long-term disposition, and these 4 facets apply to both of them. In order to measure the long-term gratitude, we use the surveys that has been used so far, like GQ6 Grat and RIF's psychological well-being. The first is a shorter questionnaire filled out daily, and the other 2 are longer, filled out at the beginning of the study to get a baseline and also at the end of each week. But in order to get the momentary affect of gratitude, which is signified by practicing gratitude, we realized that people really haven't looked at it from this perspective, so we needed to really create our own way and our own measure to get it. And so we built our mobile interface, which gets this measure for us. And you see in a screenshot of the application here, it gives people the ability to express any form of gratitude in the form of text, photo, video, or buying someone a present, or also by other things. Like, for example, people could cook their friends a meal and then report it to us. Or if they did something that was private and didn't want us to get the content, they could just report it to us as a high-level expression rather than the details. So actually, our application doesn't send that gratitude message itself. It actually makes a package of that message and uses the other means of communication that person already has on their phone, so that we don't restrict them to our own application. But instead, it gives us the measure. And also, we didn't want to restrict them to whom they express gratitude. It can be something interpersonal, like a very private message, text message, for example, they send, or it can be to everyone. For example, people could take a photo of a beautiful day and post it to Facebook or Instagram.
All right, so in the next couple of slides, I'm going to talk a little bit about our intervention and how we designed it. There were 3 main concepts that guided our intervention design. The first one is that we wanted our intervention to promote gratitude intrinsically. We didn't want to rely on peer pressure or putting one's actions into a public display. And so we decided to go with inspiration. So we took inspiring content and we tried to see if we can use them in order to encourage practicing gratitude. The second concept was that we wanted to embed gratitude as something very natural throughout your day. So we packaged the content as phone notifications. And the last thing I think that we want to mention is that we wanted to see if we can find indicators to figure out when is the right time in order to inspire you for gratitude. So we're tracking data collected from sensors on your phone in order to try and analyze it and figure out when is the right time. This is an overview of how our application looks like, the back end of our applications. So on the left side, you can see that all the triggers. These are the models who are responsible for figuring out when is the right time to trigger the user with with inspiring content. As soon as one of the triggers decides it's the right time, it issues a notification request and put it in the smart queue that you can see on the top. The smart queue has 2 main purposes. The first one, you just want to make sure that the users are not overwhelmed with notifications. And the second one is that it makes sure that the notifications are still relevant. So for example, if a notification request was issued an hour ago because of a location change, it will not prompt the user. As soon as a notification is popped out of the queue, it is assigned an inspiring content from one of the two databases that we have. We have a database for images, and we have a database for text, for quotes. As soon as the notification, as soon as the content is assigned to the notification, the user receives the notification, and then he can interact with it. We selected about 200 inspiring items and divided them into two categories. The first one is practical kindness ideas, just like the one you can see down here at the bottom. Each time you get a new piece of clothing, donate an old one. And the second category is more universal gratitude advice, like focus on the good. We have both textual and visual content separately in each one of the categories, and it is balanced between those two. And we randomly select from all of them. We've also built 3 contextual cues to figure out when is the right time to inspire for gratitude. We have pure proximity. They're based on pure proximity, location, and physical activity. In pure proximity, what we do, we monitor a close social circle and request a notification whenever peers that have been close to each other set apart. In location, we try to see when we request a notification when the user changed between one region to another. Region is about the size of a campus. And in physical activities, we request a notification after 7 minutes of consecutive physical activity, such as running, walking, or cycling. This is how our notifications look like. The users can interact with them. They can either swipe in order to ignore them. They can like them, telling us that it is the right content or the right time, or they can actually decide to express themselves. And then the interface that we showed before opens up, and they can express gratitude. They were also getting it to their smartwatches, so they got like a little vibration, and then the watch would ask you to take a few moments to think, and then you could see the content and interact with it just the same way that we showed before.
So now let's move to how we deployed our user study. So we ran a randomized control trial with 5 groups. The first was a control group. They only had the measuring interface of the application. The second group was with periodic intervention. It means that along with the measuring interface, they had been notified with inspiring content throughout the day, periodically, every 2 hours. And the third group was the contextual group. They were notified according to the contextual cues that Asaph explained to you earlier. And these 3 groups had the watches too, so that they could get the seamless notification throughout the day. But also we recruited 2 other groups, a second control and contextual group without the watches, because we want to see if that makes any difference. And these 2 are still running. So according to the timing of our study, we have a reference week at the beginning and then a second week that we add the intervention. And we realized that actually in designing our RCT, we were careful about 2 things. One was that we wanted to really have a control group along with the intervention group so that we could cancel out the environmental factors like holidays or weather changes and things like that. And also we had the reference group along with the reference week along with the intervention week so that we cancel out the individual differences between the groups. And so we recruited 15 MIT students, and they were recruited as a group, but they're actually close social circles, and the demographics are quite typical to the MIT students, as you see here. So let's move quickly to the results, actually the most important part, what we observed and what we saw. So this graph here shows practicing gratitude daily through the 2 weeks. The one up there is the first week, the one down is the second week. And the blue, green, and red are talking about frequency, span, and density of practicing gratitude. So we have chosen a sample group, which is the contextual group here, but the points that I'm going to talk about apply to all the groups. So we started actually on a Friday, April 17th, and this is Saturday, Sunday, this is the marathon day, the holiday. So the first thing that you see here is the novelty effect. As you see, in general, the first week, people used it more often, actually expressed gratitude more often comparing to the second week. So it kind of shows a novelty effect that wore off after a week of using the application. But we can see also the effect of the special occasions, like you see in the marathon day, people's expressions of gratitude went high, and actually there was a lasting effect after a few days there. And also some good days of weekends, actually, that people's expressions of gratitude increased. And we can also see the effect of social pressure. Like at the end of the first week, we had a meeting with them, and actually they were expressing more often after that. And also we've looked at the the dispositional gratitude. This is for the same group, the contextual group. And as you see, actually, the values have been quite constant throughout the 2 weeks, and we don't see much of change, and that temporal trends are not seen here. And I think that's kind of intuitive because we don't expect, in that short interval of time, we don't expect these long-term measures to change a lot. But let's talk about how effective our intervention was. The graph that you see here is the difference between week 1 and week 2 for practicing gratitude, and you see all groups, the control group here, the periodic group here, and also the contextual group here. So as you see, the bars are kind of negative, but it shows actually the effect of novelty effect. This is more pronounced here. But comparing the control group with the periodic and contextual group, we can see that these two groups really outperformed. So as you see for the control group, the frequency of expressing gratitude decreased for over 60%, but we don't see that effect for the control and for the periodic and contextual group. And also comparing these two intervention groups together, we can see that for the periodic group, the frequency facet, the periodic group outperformed for the frequency facet, but the contextual group was kind of better for span and density. However, the differences are not very much, but we can see that it actually gives us some insight for future research. And I think a good explanation about it is that for the periodic group, the nature of this periodic triggering is kind of goes with increasing the frequency more often, but as we become more intelligent about the context and inspiring people with the contextual cues, we can see that there are more actually richer expressions of gratitude in terms of span and density. And here also, these are the changes and the long-term gratitude measures for the three groups, the control, the periodic, and the contextual group. And as you see, the difference is like less than 10%, so we can say it's pretty constant, but comparing the periodic group and the contextual group, we can see that the contextual was a bit better, and we can actually, it leaves room for optimism here a bit.
Next, we set out to try and evaluate the relevance of our contextual cues. So what you can see here is an example of a day from one of our participants. The first three columns are the contextual cues, and then the last one is the notifications. So you can see, for example, that he had a social interaction throughout the night, and then he probably went to sleep, another one at noon, and so on and so forth. He transitioned from one location to another about 5 times throughout the day and had 3 times of physical activity throughout his day. And in the bottom row, you can see the notifications. He received 5 notifications throughout the day. 3 of them he ignored. These are the ones in gray. 1 of them he liked. This is the yellow one in the center. And 1 of them was actually an expression of gratitude, the golden one at the end of the day. This particular one was a post to Facebook, was "What a beautiful day I had today." 2 things that I wanted to point out using this example is that, first of all, there are much less, on average, there are less notifications in the contextual groups in comparison to the periodic group. About 5 notifications on average in comparison to 8 notifications in the periodic group. And the second thing is that many of the contextual cues show up together. You can see they're pretty, they're together on the beginning of the day and the rest of the day. And this is going to make it a little bit challenging for us to distinguish between which one of the triggers is more effective in the next couple of slides. What we do here, and I'm going to explain that in more detail in a second, is we try to figure out what is the time dependence between an expression of gratitude and the contextual cue. And the way that we do that is we look at every expression of gratitude and look back to see when before that was a contextual cue. We look at the time and we plot a histogram of those times. And this is what you can see for each one of the triggers. So for example, if you look at the proximity trigger on the red, on the left-hand side, and look at the first column, it means that 60% of the gratitude expressions had a proximity cue less than an hour before them. Okay? In order to figure out whether or not it is a good thing or a bad thing, we need to compare that to the null hypothesis. This is what you see in gray. The null hypothesis here is, given the same distribution of cues throughout the day, if the gratitude expressions were completely random, how would the histogram look like? Okay? And so this gives you like a comparison between our results and the null histogram, if they were completely independent. So we can see here that the proximity and physical activity cues perform better, I'm not sure if much better, perform better than the null hypothesis, and the location cue performed kind of like the same, maybe a little bit worse. What I should have said at the beginning was that the data that you see here is a non-intervention data, meaning all the reference weeks and the control group. Now look what happens when we analyze the same data for the intervention groups, so like the contextual intervention. So you see everything shifts to the left. Okay, everything shifts to the left, and we can see that the dependency between the gratitude expression and the contextual cue increases. This can be interpreted in two ways: either the effect of our intervention, that our intervention was effective, or the contextual relevance of when we're actually prompting the user. We currently believe that our data is not strong enough to distinguish between those two, but both of them are pretty good. The next thing I want to show up is we have 5 minutes, right? All right. So the next thing I want to show is how the users interacted with the notifications. So what we can see here is that in the contextual group, a notification was more effective in terms of practicing gratitude in comparison to the periodic group. About 60% of the notifications were actually ignored in the periodic group. And in terms of practicing gratitude, we can see 40% in comparison to 6%. The thing to be cautious about here is that the number of notifications in the periodic group is almost double the number of notifications in the contextual group. I think I'm going to skip that. And the last thing I want to show is this, which is the different types of content. So in terms of different types of content, we see a slight improvement when we give the users an images of universal gratitude advice in comparison to the rest of the types of content. So just to sum up quickly all our results, we showed that gratitude practicing increased in both the intervention groups. We showed that there's no significant change in the dispositional gratitude, which is very intuitive given the time of our experiment. We showed that peer proximity and physical activities serve as pretty good contextual cues for our intervention, and that user interactions supported the user interactions that we received support higher efficiency for contextual triggering.
So also let me add what we have learned from the project. So in terms of a study design, considering the nature of gratitude and how it is related to the momentary affect and related behaviors, we realized that it was really important to have a reference week comparing to the intervention week, and also a control group comparing to intervention groups. But we realized that the effect of environmental factors is quite bold, so in order to cancel out that, it's better if we run our study for longer periods of time, and also if we can cancel out those effects by, for example, asking people about their mood or things like weather, so that we can cancel out those other effects. And also for the contextual relevance, we realized that it's better if we have different groups for different kind of contextual cues, because most of them, they happen at the same time, and it's difficult to distinguish the results later. And also for the periodic group, it will be better if we try different time intervals. And it will be better if we could tune the group so that they get all the same amount of notification, so we didn't have an extra variable there. And in terms of application design, for further research, we would like to add content relevance so that people's feedback is incorporated inside the application, so that if they ignored or like the content, we will use that data. And also, we would like to embed the surveys inside the app so that it's not a hassle for them to get it through their email, or add the measurements of intensity because we don't measure it right now, and also improve the measurement of density because we do it manually. And we realized that it was a really good choice to use other means of communication that they already have instead of restricting it to our own application. And we would like to add streaming all non-results so that we can tune these parameters throughout the study instead of waiting for the end of the week so that we get the update from participants. Thank you.
Hello. I'm curious whether you interviewed or did a qualitative sort of interview of the study participants also, because I feel that sort of the very quantitative approach of evaluating it can be limiting because you don't have a good sense of context necessarily, or what someone is expressing gratitude about, and
So yes, we did. And some of the lessons that we put at the end are because of those inputs from the users. So for example, I think two very pronounced things that they said was one that the content should be very relevant to them, and some of the content was not relevant to them. And so this is why we wrote down that we want to be able to tune the content according to the person. And also in the same kind of area, one of the participants said that it was amazing that he was traveling on the train, and then he received suddenly a notification that told him like give your seat to someone older than you or something like that. And so he said, oh wow, I'm actually going to do that. So from this we figured out it's probably a good thing to also annotate to annotate data information that they actually express gratitude, not only to the content but also to the trigger or the context that made them make that decision. So these are like inputs that we receive from our participants.
Oh, no more time.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So I'm Niaja Farve,
I'm Natasha Jaques.
and we're going to be talking to you guys about our user study called The Challenge. So our motivation in doing this user study is we wanted to address some issues that exist in the common workplace. Two of those issues are prolonged sedentary activity. We've seen lots of articles and just papers recently about how sitting for too long can actually cut our life expectancy. And this is kind of common in most work environments where you sit in front of a computer or you just sit, period, for long periods of time. Something that's not usually thought about too much is also the effects of social isolation, which can lead to depression and anxiety and suicide. So two big issues that arise in work environments. So we tried to address these two issues with using the Media Lab as our test bed.
Okay, so I'm going to talk briefly about the system that we designed. So the idea is, because we're addressing the Media Lab, we know that many students are working hard and they don't want to take too much time out of their day to interrupt their sedentary activity and be active. So we chose to focus on 3 activities that can be done easily and quickly within the lab itself, specifically walking, ping pong, and foosball. So the idea is that our system sends out challenges, and the way it does that is it cycles through the users interested in a given activity, and it attempts to find 2 that are available to play right now. Users receive the challenge, and they have the option to accept or reject, but if they don't respond within 5 minutes, that challenge will expire. Once 2 people do accept, the system arranges a match by letting them know their partner's name, their photo, and their email address, and saying they should meet in the atrium to complete this challenge. In case people are left hanging, there's mechanisms to report no-shows, so we try to keep the user experience positive. So I'll just show you a couple of those features. Oh, sorry. So here you see how users are able to issue a challenge if they're interested in playing right now. The notifications are sent by email in the current version of the system. Users can view how many challenges they've completed and also how many steps they've taken, and both of those contributes towards points in a competition. So users can also see a leaderboard of the users that have the most points right now, and those users can win prizes.
So once we designed our system, we kind of formed 3 hypotheses that we wanted to test with our study. The 3 being that users who issue challenges with our system will be more active. The idea being that just like tiny habits, taking breaks to do these little activities of active activities will also ripple through their actual lives, and they'll actually be more active than other users. Our interventions will also nudge people to be less sedentary because we're actually asking them to take breaks. They might get used to taking those breaks and also do that more often and not be as sedentary. And then finally, users who participate in our study will meet new people. As Natasha mentioned, we're going to be pairing people randomly. So when people do our challenges, they're going to be meeting new people, and hopefully those friendships and acquaintances last. So our user study, more specifically, we had each participant was expected to do 3 things. We gave each participant a jawbone up to wear, and they could wear that either on their hip, or we gave them also wristbands to wear around their wrists. We also expected each participant to complete a pre and post survey. And so we asked them questions about their activity level, how many people they hang out with in the lab, how long they sit during the day for one period of time. We also expected each user to issue and complete challenges. So we created this dashboard that we saw a little bit earlier, where they could issue challenges as well as see their scores and also see where their points are coming from. So are they coming from the challenges they're doing or their steps, or what combination their points are coming from. Our study lasted 5 weeks. The first week being our baseline week, where we tried to see the novelty effect of giving everybody this new device where they were going to be seeing their steps. Weeks 2 through 4 was the actual competition weeks, and so that's when we let the challenges be live and people could issue challenges and accept them. And in our last week, we just wanted to monitor the after effects. So we told everybody the competition was over. We announced the winners, but we left the site live to see if the actions would persist and the results that we saw would persist longer than just the competition itself.
Okay, so let's talk a little bit about the results that we got. So you see here, this is the challenges issued for every day of the study. Obviously, the first week here is the baseline week. The system wasn't enabled, so they couldn't send challenges. And then we see this sort of patterns that make sense. This is Saturday and Sunday. You see there are very few challenges. Same with Saturday and Sunday here. But actually, this is the Saturday and Sunday right before Members Week. So it seems like a few more people were in the lab. And then you see actually on the 2 days of Members Week where the ping pong table and foosball table were put away, 0 challenges. So we see some expected patterns in this data. Overall, we had 34 participants actively participating, wearing the trackers reliably and uploading their data. And for these participants, they received on average 11 challenges and completed 2.5 of those. This led to a total of 101 challenges. Although we had some interesting effects with this data, despite the fact that everyone received at least 1 challenge, only 18 participants actively engaged with the system and completed a challenge. Although some participants were very active, with 1 completing up to 17. So we see a kind of a skewed distribution with engagement with the system. Our first hypothesis was that our system will help increase overall activity. So we have 2 graphs here to look at that. First, you see the step count and the total active time per day. We found that for all 34 participants, even those that weren't necessarily completing challenges, the step count and total active time increased significantly in the first and third week of the competition. So that's actually pretty impressive, especially because this baseline week, they had just received a brand new activity tracker. Many of them had never had one before, so we expect there to be a bit of a novelty effect. So we did increase significantly over there in these 2 weeks, but not in the second week. So we're not totally sure why that is, but we suspect it might have been prep for Members Week, because as we saw, people, we see their idle time also going up during that time. So they might be sitting at their desk working. We also found a significant positive correlation between the average active time and the number of challenges completed per day. So the more challenges going on, it seems that people are actually getting more active. Our second hypothesis was that our challenges will reduce sedentary time. And we did find a significant negative correlation between the number of challenges completed per day and the average longest continuous period of sedentary activity. So when people are doing more challenges, they actually sit for less prolonged periods at their desk. We were very happy to find this because this seems to lend credibility to our hypothesis. And we have one more piece of data to support the second hypothesis. We actually looked at those participants who did engage with the system and complete challenges and looked at their total sedentary time. And that decreased significantly in the first and third week again, but not in the second, but also after the competition ended. So that's some evidence that this effect might persist.
And so as I mentioned earlier, we asked each of our participants pre- and post-survey questions. And one of the questions we asked was, on average, how many hours do you typically spend working at your desk without a break? And this graph kind of shows the pre- and post results of that. And we can see that participants self-reported less sedentary time after the competition. And you can see almost everyone reported less sedentary time after the competition ended. And that was regardless of if they did challenges or not, which is a good result. So our third hypothesis was users meeting new people. And so we didn't have a way to quantitatively measure this, but we did ask qualitative questions every time somebody turned in their tracker. And so we had some really great results from that. People said things like, I met new people that I didn't know before, and I liked that. We had one person say that they kept getting paired on the walking competitions with their lab mate that they don't normally talk to. And so now they're going to be walking together even after the competition. And then one person said that it worked great. They were sitting for too long, and so they issued a challenge and met a new person and really enjoyed that 20 minutes that they spent walking with that person. However, people don't like to meet new people, and so that was one of the negative results that we saw, and actually we think affected how many challenges people accepted, because once people realized that they didn't have control over who they were going to go interact with, they tried to avoid that altogether in the competition. And as Natasha mentioned, that people even just didn't participate once they realized that they couldn't control who they got to go interact with. So we had people saying things like it's more fun going on walks and playing ping pong with close friends. They had specific people they wanted to play with. Many people, when we asked them what improvements could we make, they suggested that we let them choose who they could go do their activity with. But we did plan this purposely. We wanted people to meet new people, and we wanted this cross-contamination to happen between the lab, even though we know people are not comfortable doing that. And so from our results earlier, it shows that people were actually doing it even though they weren't uncomfortable with it, but some people obviously could not get over that barrier. And so what we learned.
So one of the main things we learned is that running a user study is really hard. So we'll talk about a few of the things we could have done to improve. One of the obvious ones, as the first group mentioned, is a control group would have really helped us. For example, in this finding that we saw total sedentary time decreasing, we can't be sure that's due to our study and not some external factor like the fact that it's getting nicer out. So we really need a control group to tease that apart, and that would also help us understand the effects we saw that might be due to Members Week. We'd also like to pilot test survey questions because we had this one question here: how many different people from the lab do you spend time with on a weekly basis? We didn't see a significant result with that, and we basically think it's because people didn't know how to answer that. It's a very difficult question to figure out. We also had problems with attrition. You'll notice that we had 48 trackers given out to participants, but only 34 reliably recorded and uploaded data. So we actually had 8 trackers lost. The jawbone clip design is not the best, I would say that. 1 tracker malfunctioned, and then 5 people actually took a tracker and kept it, but never actually used it or uploaded data, which was disappointing for us. And we think that better monitoring could have really helped with this issue. If we had seen that they weren't participating during the study, we could have asked for the trackers to be returned. Another issue we had was adherence. So like we mentioned, there were 34 people actively participating, but only 18 ever completed a challenge. So while Niaja mentioned that they might actually be intimidated by the stranger aspect, we also think that some were just confused about how the system worked. So we have this quote, someone saying they didn't know how it worked, someone else saying they sent out a challenge and that helped them figure it out, but an email explaining it would have been helpful. So in the future, we would definitely hold a short introduction session to just explain the system features and make that more clear. And then we received a ton of valuable feedback on how to improve the system. I can't go over it all here, but I'll highlight a few. Firstly, people said that finding a match, finding someone to play with right away, was taking too long, but other people said the 5-minute expiry period is too short. And unfortunately, these two variables trade off. So obviously, we need to do something to fix that. Now, we could send a spam email to everyone at once to see who's available, but we initially decided not to do that because we didn't want to overload participants. So we really think we need a feature that allows people to schedule a time to do challenges in the future together. We also need other ways of contacting participants right away. So SMS text messages came up a lot. We could also do push notifications. And then we had great suggestions like keeping the challenges novel. For instance, you can win a badge if you walk to a certain location. And this would help with participants who were hesitant to do the walking challenge because they didn't know how much time it would take. If there was a clear goal, that'd be a little easier. And finally, we can include other activities. So you could find someone to do a gym challenge with if you're particularly interested in going to the gym.
So future things, we definitely want to think about doing a second study where we kind of fix some of these issues. One of the main issues is kind of our matching system, because a lot of people just didn't simply complete a challenge because every time they got a challenge, it already expired just because it only had 5 minutes, and not a lot of people check their email that frequently. So finding a way to not only get the messages to them, but pair them at the right time. So maybe some kind of contextual notifications would make things easier for people to actually accept the challenges. Another thing we really want to design for in the future is making sure that our results persist past the competition ends. So some of our results suggested that most people, the results that we got were because people were doing it because of the competition, more so than using the system and liking the system. So we would like to really design something that just doesn't last a few weeks, but people could use over time and really see the same results persisting for long periods of time. So if we do the challenge part 2, you guys are all welcome to participate, and we won't give you much details besides that. And thank you, and any questions?
Anyone? Questions?
The aspect of getting folks together to play ping pong seems like such a cool idea, and it's such an easy and sort of low intensity way to get out of your seat and go and have some fun for a little while. And personally, I just love ping pong, so I thought that was like a super awesome component of your idea. One thing that I wonder though is if I were to send out an invitation to play ping pong with someone, I'd like to sort of know like how good they are or if we're at the same skill level, because I don't want to sort of waste someone's time who's like way better than me. Did you guys find that like that was an issue, like where people wanted to know sort of what the skill level was of the other person, or?
Yeah, that is a suggestion we received, so we're definitely planning for that for part 2.
Cool.
Yeah, we had one person she had the opposite, I guess, effect, because she didn't want, I guess, same thing, that she just didn't never play ping pong, and so she was hesitant about playing somebody that was really, really good. But she ended up issuing tons of challenges and ping pong challenges, and so I think just having fun doing it, people don't really mind too much. And people that are really good, they know who else is really good, so they're more likely to just go find that other really good person to practice with versus somebody that just wants to have fun playing, I guess.
Questions? Do we have time? No?
Can I ask one of the audience? I just want to ask one of the audience, how many of you, after seeing that, would like to try something like this if you haven't tried it before, or even if you have? How many people would think this would be kind of fun to keep doing it? Yeah? Okay, great.
Speak into the microphone. Should we try to speak into the microphone? All right, hi everyone. My name's Thariq. This is Sara. We're working on a project called Unlocking Sleep, and we were trying to figure out if we could improve sleep planning by using your unlock screen. Oh, oops. Okay. So our motivation and approach, very quickly, sleep is important. We all know that, but everyone is slightly different. We call this like an N of one sort of effect, that things that work for one person might not work for another. But we think generally that planning helps. And planning is hard because it requires logging, and logging is hard. So we wanted to find out, can we use our phone unlock screen to help us log data and give us feedback about sleep planning? And this is how it looked. So you get a question when you unlock your phone. Occasionally you slide and you log the data. So our main sort of question when we were designing the approach was, how can we scale N of one experiments, right? Like, we realize that everyone is different and that one approach, one app that we built is not going to work for everyone. But how can we scale it? So the first thing we decided was real-time data collection and analysis was really important, that we get data, we analyze it, and we incorporate it into our system right away. That meant limiting in-person requirements, so you don't have to come to us to download the data. We get it remotely. We can analyze it remotely. Third is dynamic feedback on questions. So based on data that you gave us before, can we change the questions and prompts we give you to be more personalized? And finally, we were interested in sleep planning, but we think this is a more powerful interface. And so we want to make it generalizable to any sort of health or behavior change kind of question. So quickly about technology, we used Firebase as an example as a way of streaming data. Getting data off smartphones is actually a really hard problem because Wi-Fi goes in and out, things like that. Firebase is a great way of storing the data. We used Android because Android allowed us to replace unlock screens, and we used a web interface for visualizing it, and you'll see the work that Sarah's done there, which is really cool.
Okay, so in this study that we ran, we recruited 19 MIT students with Android phones. 6 of them were men and 13 were women. The first week we sent them an email of the questions via a Google survey, a very typical way you might fill out answers for this type of data. And then during the second and third weeks, we had them download and use an app, just asking static questions, the same questions that appeared in the survey, but this time just on your phone and throughout the day. And then during the week 4, we changed the questions so that they became dynamic. And instead of just being a static question, they were based on your previous responses. One example of that is we can say, we noticed you were tired the last couple of days. What time are you planning on going to bed tonight? Or we can say, your sleep debt is this many hours. What time are you planning on going to sleep? Just little things to remind them of what's been going on in the past and using that data to dynamically influence them. And then finally, we ask them a post-study questionnaire. And these participants are also allowed to keep the app on their phone, so some of them are still logging data for us right now, which is pretty cool. Specifically, the questions we asked was when they planned to wake up, when they planned to go to sleep, when they actually did those two things, and then also how are they feeling about stress, health, alertness, and mood, to just get a little more information on what's going on. The actual data that we collected is when and where they unlocked their phone. So each time they unlocked their phone, we got a location and we got a timestamp. We also got the daily answers to each question to get a sampling of what's going on with their sleep and what's going on with their overall health. And then we also measured how long it took to answer these questions to make sure that we weren't having them spend too long unlocking their phones. So we've collected so far about just over 400 days of data. They've unlocked their phones almost 20,000 times, which is remarkable, which is an average of 42 times a day, and some of the people were much higher, closer to like 300 times a day. And there's about 7,500 questions asked, and that includes skipped questions. So here's some results. People are not good at planning sleep, duh, but we kind of reconfirm this. You can see here that the pink is when they plan to go to sleep and the dark purple is when they actually did go to sleep. So most people, as you can see, put sleep off, and then some people made up for that by sleeping in a little bit, and other people seemed they had some sort of deadline, so they actually got up when they planned to get up. Some people got to bed earlier than they thought, good for them, but on average we find that people go to bed an hour later than they planned. Sure. These are different days, so this is just showing a very small snapshot of the data. So we asked, this is from the Google form data, so we asked them about noon each day to fill out this form. So you'll see the sleep planning for the next day. So this is in the future, and then they can fill out when they went to bed last night. But we found that our app can help people think about sleep. That little graph is hard to read, but the bottom half, it's a scale of how much did this app change how you thought about sleep? And most people strongly agreed that more strongly agreed that it did change their thinking. And a quote that it helps somebody remember to think about sleep by asking them often. But unlocking your phone is a very automatic action. We were glad that it was, but there's a slight problem that it's so automatic that we just do it, and we allowed users to skip these questions, and it was the same action as the unlock. So that resulted in a lot of skipped questions and some incorrect answers. And so people reported that the Google Forms were more accurate results than our app, but we're working on things to fix that. So here's some just quick results. Most of these are inconclusive, but you can see that the timing of their sleep is it's pretty much no different. Each of these different colors is a different week. So you can see in participants across the bottom. So you can see that different people were relatively the same. Some people started going to bed earlier, some people a little bit later. That might be due to because it's the end of the semester and school often takes precedence over sleep, unfortunately. We can also see mood. Okay, so for this, it's a little hard to see with all of them, but you can see that this particular person, subject 1, varying throughout the time that we collected this data, participant 4, and onwards. This allows us to monitor people without having to talk to them and to be able to see their results. We'd also like to implement this so that they can see their own results and their own data as compared to others. Finally, just a particular subject I'd like you to see. This is number 4. You can see that their alertness drops here. And that happens to correspond to a very short amount of sleep that they received just a couple of hours. So you can see that this purple here is when they went to bed, and you can see that it varies, and it looks like a weekly trend. You go to bed a little bit better at the beginning of the week and worse towards the end of the week. And then the blue is when they woke up.
Okay. So what we did here was a couple things. One was we built a scalable system for asking health-related questions, and we thought that was very successful. We thought that we found a good way of asking questions, even though there were problems with accuracy. We think that they're more like implementation problems, and the value of being able to sample people almost at any time is extremely valuable. We ran a pilot study. We got some encouraging data, but it was complicated by implementation problems like the skip, and in general, we didn't put a lot of time into the design of the app. So things we want to find out. So one is, how can we give feedback using more than just questions? So in the very last week of the study, we ran the dynamic questions, so we would insert data into the questions. But we also think there's room for passive messages as you unlock your phone, or maybe as you answer a question, we can give you prompts, things like that. But of course, like running a month-long study and implementing all of this tech is really hard. So the other point we want to figure out is, like, is it a problem with the implementation? Could we have designed it better? Yes. Or is there a paradigm process? So.
And we're planning on doing this again over the summer, so if you have an Android phone or want to borrow one, that'd be awesome. We'd love to have you. But we're going to change the design and the reliability of the system so that you can we can get more reliable answers, and then also to make it a little bit more friendly than just a black screen. We're also planning on having more dynamic feedback, so instead of just a couple of questions of dynamic things, to have more dynamic questions, and as Thariq said, to have things that were static as well, just a prompt or some feedback on how you were doing. And then we want to have purely digital consents and installation, so this can all be done remotely, and they never have to feel like they're in a study, and instead just feeling like they're using an app. So yeah, in conclusion, we're going to do this again, but we got some encouraging data. Nothing really conclusive yet, but we're excited to see how this goes from here.
Questions? So I'm curious, is there at the moment, do they get any feedback about their own data? I mean, can they ever see their own data on, like, here's how alert I was all the different days of the week, and here's how much sleep I had the night before, stuff like that? Can they see that anywhere?
So right now they can't.
Yeah.
They can see it sometimes in the questions we ask. We might pull out aspects of it. I think we made that as sort of a conscious choice in terms of, like, what we wanted to implement. We felt that our decision here was that we felt that, like things like Fitbit and stuff like that are great for visualizing data, but visualizing data doesn't help you change your behavior. So we wanted to see instead if we focused on the prompts and putting the data in there, that would be great. A lot of our participants asked for the data, and Sara was just scrolling through it, so we can definitely go send it off to them. But that's not, I think, our behavior change aspect. It's just sort of like something we can provide as a side effect of it. So, yeah.
This notion of the scalable system for asking health-related questions is really cool. And I was just curious if you ran across in the literature any examples of that being used, like on the lock screen, for like emotional wellness, like tracking mood through the lock screen.
Emotional wellness.
Like mental wellness, like people reporting to their psychiatrist or psychologist or anything like that.
Right. So I mean, we did ask questions like, "How are you feeling right now?" We didn't come across anything that was like very like that would have that feedback loop of it reporting to a psychiatrist or a health professional. But again, like, so we've built a system to have like where the data is very like accessible and easy to manage, and so you could imagine that like we could do that in the future.
So there's been some studies before that give you like a push notification, like, hey, fill out this questionnaire. But as far as we know, except for another study that Thariq did, nobody has taken the unlock screen using it this way. Is that interesting?
Thanks.
Yeah, it's the same one.
Dare not ask how much sleep the class Did a dip in your data last night.
All right. Cool. Okay, so hey everyone, I'm David. This is Jenny, and we're here to talk about avatars as a fitness motivation tool. So just as a reminder for those of you that may not have been aware of what we've done up to now, the basic structure of this is that we have two groups of people, one receiving a pet that gets sick and sad or happy and healthy, depending on their Fitbit data, and one group that's getting a little version of themselves that's getting fit and happy or fat and sad, depending on their Fitbit data. And the motivation for this comes from kind of two places. So in one thread, there's the Tamagotchi, the virtual pet that you take care of that was popular in the 1990s and extremely addictive and has sort of evolved nowadays to include some fitness wearables for kids where they take care of things, and apps like this, Walk 'em On, which is a phone app that you feed it by walking. And the other thread is some very interesting research that's been going on in avatars. And these are some screenshots of some experiments they've done where you watch yourself doing fitness activities or other behavior sorts of activities, and they've shown very promising results in modifying behavior. And these two threads, the psychology behind them is very different, right? So with all of these experiments, it's realism. They use VR headsets. They're doing everything they can to make this a real experience that you identify with. It's identity. And with the other set, the sort of Tamagotchi, it's about empathy and caring. It's not so much about this identity. So with our study, we're comparing those two, and we're trying to see, is one or the other more engaging in this context? And do more empathetic people respond to their pets? Do more narcissistic people respond to their mini version of themselves?
Cool. Just to give you guys a quick overview of our study and what we did, we had 21 participants. They were all MIT students between the ages of 25 to 34. 11 guys, 10 girls, and we excluded anyone who had any kind of health issues that prevented them from being able to increase their level of activity, or people who were working out way too much. We had one guy who signed up and did the survey, but then we realized he was running for the Boston Marathon. That would have totally skewed the data, so we're unfortunately, you can't be a part of it. We were able to do this study for 2 weeks. We still have people wearing their Fitbits now, so hopefully we'll be able to track more data for the next week. And we split the human avatars and the pets across the males and females. We didn't want the gender to be askew. And every day, in the morning, they would, the participants would receive a daily text from us with a photo and a state of their avatar as our interaction with them. So to get a sense of the levels of empathy and narcissism that people had, we looked at a lot of survey literature across the internet, and we found a lot of surveys out there that were able to help us to identify those. So when we did an onboarding survey, we asked people a number of series of different questions that incorporated findings about how to test for narcissism. We had the Murray's narcissism scale, and then we had the empathy quotient that was developed by Simon Baron-Cohen. And as well, we asked them about their exercise expectation outcomes and self-reliance and and then their confidence at how they felt like they were able to exercise. And then we asked those questions again when they did the exit survey. Just to give you guys a sense of some of the questions that we asked them for narcissism, one of the questions was, I can become entirely absorbed in thinking about my own personal affairs, my health, my cares, or my personal relations with others, and a scale of 1 through 5. With empathy, I can easily tell if someone else wants to enter a conversation. And then finally, when we did the exit survey, just to skip down to the very bottom, we would ask them questions like, I got stressed when my avatar started getting sad or sick, and then they would like respond on a scale of 1, which is like strongly disagree, to 5, which is strongly agree. And then so David's going to do a quick demo of the.
Yeah, so instead of sort of talking through the experience, we just sort of made a little video of what the actual app is like. So, so this is it. When you first sign up, you go to this login screen and you log in. And after you log in, you get redirected to the Fitbit page. And from there, you'll get redirected to an avatar creation screen. So this is the Fitbit page. You allow it, and now it redirects you to this little section, and there's your little dude, and you can decide how to build him. In terms of the mechanics of deciding how fat or skinny to present this person to you, we based it on the distance and speed at which people were walking over the amount of time that they were sedentary. And sort of looking at the data afterwards, it tracked very well all metrics, basically. How long and how far they walked are very closely related, and their sedentary time is the inverse of that, more or less. So we actually, as well with that, used all of their past data and a distribution of that to decide what weight to present to them at first. So everyone gets sort of a Gaussian distribution for themselves, which can be a problem if you have novelty effect to start and you do really great high energy exercise at the very beginning, and then you don't after that. So anyway, yeah. So this. The only reason, so, somehow we went back. The only reason that showed me being fat is because normally it would show you being normal the first time, but it's linked to my Fitbit data, and unfortunately, yeah, I've been working diligently on this. So yeah, so this is just a breakdown of the different 4 of the 6 different weights that you can have. So you can see sort of the buff mini David over there, and it says mini David looks amazing, great work, over to mini David has really fallen off the wagon over here. And these are some examples of some of the avatars that people made, and the pet. So the pet is the exact analog to this, except you can see the pet, it's happy, and then it starts to get a little concerned and sick, and very sick and green. So instead of going after people when they weren't syncing their Fitbits, we had sort of an auto text that was the worst state of your character, and it says at the top, you haven't synced your Fitbit in 3 days, and we have to assume the worst in order to encourage them to come back. So if they didn't want to comply, we didn't sort of force the issue. So hopefully that gives you a good sense for the actual experience that our users had. Now I'm going to talk a little bit about the data that we've collected. So just like everyone here, we've been collecting it in the last few days, so everything's preliminary. But I'm going to talk about engagement data first, and then exercise data and empathy a little bit. So what you see here are is the number of syncs throughout our study. So you can see on the left, every individual is broken out with their number of syncs. And then this is the cumulative total. And the top is for the humans, and the bottom is for the pets. So everyone was syncing hundreds to thousands of times. Generally speaking, this is good data. There's not too much important to take away from this, except for when we start to zoom in on the people that have the fewest amounts of syncs to judge compliance. So if we look at the worst person from the pet side, we can see there's one day over here where they fail to sync their Fitbit. And if we zoom in on some of the people from the human side, though, we see this person didn't comply maybe 5 days out of the study. And if we look at this other person, they're even worse. They're probably about 6 days. They just didn't even sync their Fitbit. So it seems like the people in the human group, there was a bigger percentage of them that sort of gave up. On the opposite side, and this was really interesting to me, is how many times they actually opened the app. So they had the option to open the app. It doesn't do anything. It just blinks at you and it's fat or it's skinny. But they have the option. And then they get a text every morning, right? So I was expecting no one really to ever open the app. But we actually had someone you can see over the course of 15 days or 20 days or so open it 83 times. So they were averaging 5 times a day. And if we sort of zoom in after the novelty effect, you can see that we had one person in the pet group that checked it a little over 1 extra time a day. And then in our human group, we actually had 3 people that checked it an extra time or more a day. So it kind of, from the sync and app engagement data, it looks like the human group was actually more divisive, and the pet group was less so. So as I just mentioned, the human group, we had more people checking their avatar more, and we saw a corresponding higher attachment rate with the human group. When we started to look at this data in terms of empathy and narcissism, it's a very small data set, right? So it's hard to really pull any conclusions out. But I think it's encouraging that it seems like if you chart empathy versus attachment for the pets, it seems like there is maybe a slight upward trend there. So it would be interesting to probe that a little further and see if it is actually true that empathy leads to higher engagement. So now I'm going to talk a little bit. So with the engagement, we saw sort of the human group pretty divisive, either very engaged or not. When it comes to the fitness data, I think analyzing it as a group, there's little utility at this point. So this is preliminary, and we're going to be diving into this in a lot more detail on an individual basis. But yeah, that's sort of the overall framing of this, right? So over here we have the distance that each person ran, and this is just to give you a little bit of context. Overall, the distances were about the same, but if we zoom in on these two people, like this person was running 11 miles a day a couple days, and the person to the top was running 14 on a couple of days. So the sort of variation, yeah, I mean, I don't know, maybe a little fat guy really motivates you. It's great, but I think we need to sort of break that down a little bit further into individual people to understand what's going on there, because with the amount of variation from individuals, it's not meaningful right now. And so another thing we looked at was, if we send you a text today that shows you're fat, do you take extra steps? And similarly for all of the states. So what you see here is the text you got on a given day, and then how many steps extra or less than your average did you take? And again, it's a small data sample. Maybe you can argue that with sort of slightly positive reinforcement, you tend to take a little bit more, but more data would be helpful. And then this is likelihood of actually opening the app and looking at your avatar after seeing a certain state as well. So it seems like if you've gotten a really positive reinforcement, you're more likely to open the app. And then as you get slightly chubbier, maybe you're a little bit more likely to open the app to see if you've moved up in the world. Yeah, so I think to summarize, again, it's a small data set. What we've seen, I think, is actually very compelling in terms of the amount of engagement. I was very surprised how engaged people were. And I think the divisiveness of the human group is particularly interesting. In terms of the exercise data, we're collecting control data now so that we can, not as they're tapering off from the study, and we're going to try to look at people on an individual level with the qualitative data and sort of understand a little bit better the whole picture.
I wanted to give you guys a small sample of the qualitative data that we got from surveys and interviews with our participants, and they really matched up to the quantitative data that we saw. We saw that like people were either really engaged with their pets or their humans, and then they would actually feel like emotions that they would characterize, and that would lead to them being able to check their devices more, or they were actually just very annoyed with the entire app and very over it. So, for instance, someone said, I was really encouraged to be active, and this is someone who had like a human. Relieved when I got acknowledgement for active day, mild dread for the update of an active day, and very protective, which was a very emotional kind of word to use. And then someone else who had a pet at the very bottom said, annoyed, caring when she just turned sad. I like how they thought their cat was a she. I wanted to make her feel better, but when my efforts of walking like a satisfactory amount to me didn't make the cat feel a bit better, I was annoyed. And then there were like several people who told us that they didn't feel any emotional connection, and they felt like the data itself, it wasn't really accurate of the amount that they were like they were working out per day. So that really helped us to think about what we would do differently if we were to redesign this experiment. The first thing was we realized that all of our participants had a very strong sense of how much they worked out every day, and they really demanded that the data be very accurate to be able to reflect that, or else the trust was like immediately broken, and they no longer trusted the state of like the avatar. So we will have to go back and think about how to simplify the causal link between the avatar, but between their behavior and the Fitbit data, which isn't very robust, and like the way that we can be able to reflect that in the avatar itself. And the second thing that really is closely tied with that was they really wanted to see immediate effects. So the fact that we were only sending them one state per day, it wasn't enough. They wanted to be rewarded for seeing a change in their state every time that they did work out. So that led to a sense of decreasing like responsibility and increase of apathy with the avatar over time. And then in terms of other things that we would have done, I think that we would have definitely tried to pair more people who scored higher on the narcissistic scale with humans. We did actually like a random like sample in terms of assigning people to pets or humans, and then we asked them to take the survey afterwards. And it just so happened that people who score really high on the narcissistic scale all got assigned to pets. So like our data there in terms of the smallest sample group, it wasn't very robust. So that wasn't really able to test that like hypothesis that we had. And then what we'll do next is definitely to take a look at the data, be able to marry like the quantitative data on like the individuals with the qualitative data that we have for every individual, rather than looking at them as a group. And we'll definitely think about designing for engagement first, and thinking about how to do that better. In terms of key learnings, we were actually really surprised by the number of people who were really engaged with with this app. The fact that some people were checking it more than 5 times per day was something that we weren't expecting at all. So we think that there's definitely promise here of where this could go. It's just a matter of how do we how do we design for it to be able to really tie the causal effect in a way that's much more intuitive and much more like able to create trust between like the users and what they think, and the way that we're able to show that data back to them. And I think that that's the most important thing that we'll have to be able to work on, and that was the most like important insight that we learned from this experiment overall. Is there anything else?
No, I think that's great.
Yeah.
Questions? I was thinking as I was sitting here, this may not be humane, but maybe it should be tied to a real pet that gets fed whenever you run or something. Maybe people will be more.
Cues was hard enough this time. I don't.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So if you randomly assign to the, I can just talk loudly. If you randomly assign to the pet versus avatar conditions, then why do you think comparing those groups is not valid?
I think we do think it's valid. It's just that it's so small and there's so much variation. And
So it's a sample size problem?
Yeah.
So if your little dude is fat, how long does he stay fat? Like if he's fat for 3 days in a row and then I do a little bit of walking, does like that boost it up a lot, or is it like slow changing?
Right. So the behavior is very time dependent. So this is something that we ran into, which is that it's trained on your past all of your past data, right? So in this study, because we only have 5 or 6 days in the past, if you were sedentary for a couple days and then you did a lot of activity, it would change pretty rapidly. I did it so that there's a bit of a time constant, so the last 3 days, the last 2 days sort of affect what you're doing a little bit today, but the majority of your score is based off of today. So the people that are checking it every day, they should be seeing changes.
Yeah, but I think that that's what we mean by trying to design for like an engagement. If you're like someone who has been like not working out for 5 days and you work out just like a little bit, that should be something that you can see like a small change in to be able to like give you encouragement and be able to nudge you like a little bit more. So within this like experiment, we saw that people definitely really wanted that and something that we would like to do if we had more bandwidth for it.
Yeah, and if you're the type that does mode switch a lot, then that's reflected sort of in the distribution that we're using, right? So you will get very immediate feedback if you happen to be someone that doesn't work out a lot and then works out a lot. If you happen to be someone that works out consistently and then you do nothing for 2 days and then you work out at the same level that you sort of have over the course of your past, then it'll bump you up quickly from fat to normal, but you're not gonna sort of be extra rewarded for that, right? Yeah.
I may have missed this detail. It's not just getting fatter or thinner, but it's looking happy or sick
Right.
and sad.
Right.
Those look like they were all going in the same direction. Did you consider making the happiness change a little bit more? You look like you're trying harder or something.
I think that's a great idea. Honestly, the space is so complex, and I feel like there are so many little things to try and pull out that the way I see this moving forward in any serious manner is to start to design for engagement, right? And to try to get people sort of, that was the most promising thing, and the thing I'm most excited about is that I think people actually, even with this sort of rough and not very great thing, we're checking it 5 times a day. I mean, that blows my mind, right? So if you can build a big user base and start to tweak those little things with sample sizes that are reasonable, I feel like you can start to tease it apart. But there are so many holes I feel like you could poke and little variations that might cause effects here that it's just really hard.
It's really redundant with it getting thinner, right? Everything's sort of happy, thin, or sad, fat.
Right. Yeah, everything sort of, it flows together in as much as possible, right? And we're just trying to do a very broad brush stroke, system level sort of thing here. But ultimately, I'd love to do something very detailed and subtle. Thank you.
Thank you.